a young girl disappeared on the way from the bus stop to her home. The police began searching, and at first thought that the case would be easy. But to everyone's surprise, this story became one of the most complex and high-profile in British history. Despite the fact that the case was closed quite quickly, its echoes do not subside to this day, causing a lot of indignation and controversy. Helen McCord was born on July 29, 1965 in the English city of Bootle. Soon she had a younger brother, and the girl from her earliest years helped take care of him. Later their parents divorced, and her mother married another man. Helen and her brother moved to a small village called Bellinger, located near the city. It was a quiet, peaceful place where no serious crime could occur for decades. The local residents knew each other well, and were not afraid that something bad could happen in their village. Helen grew up in this peaceful environment, had many friends, and was a model daughter. After graduating from school, she got a job at an insurance company located in Liverpool. The girl remained to live in Bellinger, so she had to get to the office by train and bus. On February 9, 1988, when Helen was 22 years old, she went to work as usual. First, she and her mother agreed to go out to lunch together, since the woman worked just a few streets away. However, that day the weather suddenly deteriorated. A strong wind rose, and it began to rain. So they decided to reschedule their lunch together. Her mother came home much earlier. Helen called her towards the end of her shift. The girl said that she planned to go on a date in the evening, and asked her mother to heat up dinner for her arrival so that she would have time to wash her hair. Helen usually returned home a little after 5 p.m., but that day she was clearly late, and her mother began to worry. However, soon the news said that due to bad weather, a tree fell on one of the railway lines, and this temporarily paralyzed the movement of electric trains. By 7 o'clock in the evening, the mother began to worry again, and decided to call the railway service. She explained the situation, but the operator stated that a fallen tree had blocked another road, and this did not in any way affect the schedule of the trains Helen rode. At this point, the woman began to seriously think that something had happened to her daughter. Firstly, Helen almost always came home from work on time. Secondly, she made sure to call home and let them know if she planned to be late. Although there were no mobile phones in those years, a girl could call her mother from work or any telephone booth, which were found on almost every corner. The mother thought that something bad might have happened to Helen as a result of the bad weather. For example, due to heavy rain and wind, it could fall and damage something. Then the woman and her son began calling local hospitals in all nearby settlements. But they didn't get anyone like Helen. The mother also assumed that her daughter might be late at work and called the office. But there they told her that the girl had left several hours ago. None of her friends knew where she was either. After this, Helen's mother, stepfather, and boyfriend decided to go searching. They walked along the road along which the girl was returning home from work. Helen always took the same route. In Liverpool, she took the train and went to the small town of St. Helens. There she went to the bus stop and went to Bellinger. They never managed to find her. And then the family decided to contact the police. The first thing they did was notify officers in Liverpool and the surrounding area, sending out signs of the missing girl. But no one ever found her. The next morning, when Helen still did not show up at home and did not contact anyone, the police decided to reconstruct her route and the chronology of the events of that evening. It was important for them to understand at what stage of her journey from work to home she disappeared. To do this, investigators turned to the public in search of witnesses. They also spoke to Helen's colleagues at the train station and bus company. As a result, they came to an unexpected conclusion. They were able to confirm that on the evening of her disappearance, the girl took not only a train, but also a bus to her village. It was strange, because from the bus stop to her house, it was only 200 meters. Detectives began to believe that she might have been the victim of a kidnapping. After all, in the event of an accident, she would have been discovered long ago. As part of standard procedure, Detectives began checking people close to Helen, since in most cases they are the ones behind these types of crimes. Her boyfriend and stepfather had solid alibis for that evening. Friends and acquaintances of the girl were also excluded from the list of possible suspects. Having formed search teams of 120 officers, the police began a detailed inspection of the area on the way and stopped to Helen's house. They tried to find any evidence, for example, an element of her clothing or something that a potential kidnapper might have dropped. At the same time, leaflets with information about the missing girl were distributed in nearby settlements. Divers explored local bodies of water, and police officers knocked on every door, questioning people. They also went into all the shops, bars, and cafes in Bellinger. After talking with the staff of a bar called George and the Dragon, they had their first clue. Considering that this establishment was located not far from Helen's house, she periodically went there with her friends. But investigators found that just 2 days before her disappearance, the owner of the establishment banned the girl from visiting the bar after one incident. She had an argument with a woman who was very drunk and spilled her drink on her. Helen did not provoke a conflict and went to the toilet to try to wash the stains from her clothes. But the drunk woman followed her and began to behave aggressively. At some point, she even tried to hit her, after which the bar owner kicked both of them out of the establishment. Moreover, he forbade them to ever return. The police decided to find out more about this conflict situation. The next day, they went to the bar to talk to its owner, Ian Simpson. In addition, this establishment was located right between the bus stop and Helen's house. The man told detectives about that evening and stated that he was forced to put both girls out the door so that their conflict would not disturb other visitors. As they talked, the bar slowly filled with people, and it became noisy. Then the police invited Yenna to go with them to the station to continue the dialogue in a calm environment. But something strange began here. The man became noticeably nervous, refused to go with them, and tried to end the conversation. All this seemed suspicious to investigators. Why is he so afraid to go to the police station? He may have had something to do with Helen's disappearance, or he knew more about it than he said. They decided to take a closer look at him and found out that the man was known for his love of love. Even though he was a married man with 2 children, he constantly flirted with other women, and everyone in the village knew about it. The police also found out that he constantly showed attention to Helen. When she went to the bar, the man gave her free drinks and tried to flirt, but the girl never reciprocated. It seemed strange to her that a married father of 2 children would behave this way. Investigators approached him again and asked where he was the evening of Helen's disappearance. The man said that he spent time with his mistress in an apartment located above the bar. According to him, he lived there most of the time because he was afraid that his establishment might be robbed. Detectives spoke to his mistress, and an interesting twist awaited them. The woman stated that she and Yen actually planned to meet at his apartment at approximately 7 p.m. However, that evening he called her and asked her to come a few hours later. She finally arrived at about 7:30, but the man was not at home. He returned only around 10:30. All this looked extremely suspicious. It is obvious that Yen lied to the police about his alibi, which automatically made him a suitable candidate for the role of suspect. Another detail seemed strange to the detectives. The man had several fresh scratches on his neck. He said that he received them during a quarrel with his wife, when she found out about his mistress. However, investigators spoke with a woman, and she denied scratching her husband. The police spoke with Yen again, and he changed his story. Now our man has claimed he suffered scratches while separating Helen and another drunk girl on the evening of the bar brawl. Detectives spoke with this girl, and she also denied the story. According to her, it never came to a fight, and none of them scratched the bar owner. Soon the police had a witness who told them an alarming fact. On the evening of Helen's disappearance, he walked along that street, and at some point heard a piercing female scream. It came straight from the bar, but stopped very quickly. Based on all this, Detectives began to believe that 31-year-old Ian Simpson had a direct connection to the girl's disappearance, but he continued to deny everything. Investigators needed strong evidence to link him to the case. Otherwise, they would simply be powerless. The police decided to search his car, where two terrible pieces of evidence awaited them. Firstly, several traces of red spots were found there. Secondly, part of a woman's earring was lying on the floor. She was immediately taken to Helen's mother. She confirmed without a shadow of a doubt that this jewelry belonged to her daughter. Yen was then arrested on charges of kidnapping. Although the police still didn't know what happened to Helen, they searched the bar and the apartment on the second floor, where new evidence awaited them. In both places, there were many faint traces of red stains that were clearly trying to be washed away. On one of these stains, forensic scientists found a fingerprint that belonged to Yen. In addition, the missing part of the same earring that was previously found in his car was found in the apartment. Despite such an impressive array of evidence, the man continued to deny everything. By this time, the police already thought that Helen was no longer alive, but they also needed to find her body. Otherwise, the court could acquit Yen. They believed that the red stains in his bar, apartment, and car belonged to the girl. But in those years, DNA analysis was just beginning to be used in forensic science, and organizing such studies was very problematic. The man himself told the police that the red spots belonged to his dog, which injured its paw. In an attempt to find more evidence, investigators decided to seek help from the public to mount a larger search. More than 2,000 people responded to their call. Among them were both residents of the village and nearby settlements. Together with the police, they examined the area around Bellinger, including forests and fields. Soon, new evidence actually appeared in this case. But it was not volunteers who discovered it. 25 kilometers from the village, in a place called Collins Green, a man was walking with his dog and at some point noticed a towel on the ground with traces of red spots. He looked around and quickly saw a second such towel, as well as several pillowcases. In addition, nearby he found men's socks, a jacket, and underpants. Some of these items were also covered with red spots. He informed the police about his discovery, and they took the items into evidence storage. But there was one problem here. Considering that this area was 25 kilometers from Bellinger, officers from another police department responded to the call, and they didn't link this discovery to the Helen McCourt case. For this reason, the investigators searching for her did not even know about the discovery of these things. Ultimately, the police did see a connection between these cases, and the inscription on the jacket they found helped them. It was a print advertising a beer brand that was on sale at the George and the Dragon Bar at that very time. Having learned about this, investigators came to the conclusion that all these things most likely belonged to Ian Simpson. So detectives had plenty of evidence samples, but no Helen's body to request DNA testing. It was 1988, and such tools were not yet widely used. The police decided to compare samples of red stains from the bar, Simpson's car, and from things found by a witness with samples from Helen's closest relatives, her parents and younger brother. The results showed that these samples are very close and are almost guaranteed to belong to close relatives. Thus, the detectives were finally convinced that the traces of red spots belonged to Helen. This clearly indicated that Yen had something to do with her disappearance. But they still needed more evidence. The problem is that the expression "no body, no business" did not appear out of nowhere. It was extremely rare for courts in Britain to convict in such cases unless the victim's body was found. No matter how strong the evidence, in the eyes of justice, there is always the slightest possibility that the victim may be alive. The police hoped that they would be able to gather more information against Yen. So they interviewed everyone he knew. After talking with the cleaning lady at the bar, they learned about another suspicious episode. The woman said that the morning after Helen disappeared, she came to work as usual to clean the room. To her surprise, the woman saw the owner himself doing general cleaning. He washed floors, walls, and tables. Moreover, judging by the scope, he had been doing this for more than an hour. The problem is that this has never happened before. Yen never once took part in cleaning his bar, and in general he rarely got up this early. Usually, when the cleaning lady came for her morning shift, the man was still sleeping in his apartment upstairs. When she asked in surprise why he suddenly decided to wash the entire room himself, he replied that his dog had made a mess. Another witness told police that he walked past the bar at night and heard the sound of a vacuum cleaner running from inside. The police concluded that Yen had been trying to get rid of the traces all night, but he was unable to completely cope with this task. However, despite the impressive array of evidence, they still did not take the case to court. Investigators tried to find the girl's body, but even large-scale searches did not bring any results. A month later, another piece of evidence fell into their hands. The man was walking along the river, about 30 kilometers from Bellinger. He noticed a woman's purse in the grass and looked inside, finding documents in the name of Helen McCord. The police arrived at the scene, and soon they found even more evidence. Nearby they found her clothes, which the girl was wearing on the day of her disappearance, and also a second earring, the same as in Yen's car. But then an even more terrible discovery awaited the detectives. Nearby lay a coiled piece of cable in which a woman's hair was tangled. They were sent to the laboratory, and soon experts confirmed that the hair belonged to Helen McCord. After examining the girl's bag, investigators found a receipt from a pharmacy in St. Helens. It turned out that she had gone there to do some shopping on the evening of her disappearance, just before catching the bus to Bellinger. The police found all the items on this list near her purse, except one toothbrush. But she was soon discovered too. True, not 30 kilometers from the village, next to the purse, but in the very bar of Jan Simpson, where investigators were still continuing large-scale searches. They also managed to find her hair clip, and Helen's mother confirmed that the girl had left for work with her that morning. But that's not all. A piece of woman's hair that belonged to Helen was found in the bar. This was confirmed by DNA analysis. Despite all this, detectives continued to cling to every lead and sent the girl's clothes to the laboratory. After a thorough examination, forensic scientists found pieces of carpet on it, the same one that was laid in the George and the Dragon bar. In addition, traces of dog hair were found on the clothing, which matched the fur of Yen's dog. After this, experts began examining 2 rings and a bracelet that were seized from the man after his arrest. Forensic experts found traces of dirt on them and compared them with the ground in the area where towels and clothes had previously been found. As surprising as it may sound, they managed to prove that the dirt belonged specifically to that region, which once again confirmed that the man was there and threw out these things himself. Soon after, police found another piece of evidence. A shovel was found near the town of Rixton, located 24 kilometers from Bellinger. They were able to find out that the shovel belonged to Jan Simpson, and apparently, he used it to get rid of traces of the crime. But they still could not find the body itself, despite the constant work of hundreds of volunteers. The girl's relatives were almost 100% sure that she was no longer alive. After all, with such a colossal set of evidence, it was simply pointless to wait for a miracle. And yet they could not be completely sure that the criminal would be punished. Jan Simpson continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the crime. Ultimately, the police took the case to court. The trial began a year after Helen disappeared, in February 1989. This was one of the first cases in Britain where a person was tried to be convicted of kidnapping without the victim's body. Therefore, despite the colossal amount of evidence, the prosecution doubted its victory. According to their version, that evening Helen got off the bus and headed towards her house along her usual path. As she walked past the George and the Dragon bar, Jan Simpson noticed her and, under some pretext, started a conversation. Perhaps the man was trying to discuss with her the incident that resulted in him banning her from his establishment. Next, he had to somehow lure her inside. According to investigators, Yen could have suggested that she sort out the conflict and lift a ban on visiting the bar, considering that this was practically the only place Helen could go with her friends in Bellinger. She was interested in resolving the conflict. Apparently, the man lured her inside the room, where at that time there was no longer a single visitor. Almost immediately after that, he attacked her. This is confirmed by the testimony of a passing witness. He heard a woman scream, which quickly cut off. After attacking Helen, Yen dragged her into his second-floor apartment. There he may have exposed the girl to intimacy, after which he waited until it was dark and loaded her into the car. A man drove Helen away from Bellinger, after which he scattered her belongings, his clothes, and other items in other remote places. There were several versions about his motives. From the testimony of many witnesses, the investigation knew that Yen repeatedly showed signs of attention to the girl, but she always refused him. Perhaps that evening he saw an opportunity to make his criminal desires come true. The second version was that during a conversation there was some conflict between them, and in a fit of rage he committed a crime. It is possible that he and Helen began to argue, and she threatened to tell his wife about the constant harassment. But still, this theory seemed less realistic. After the prosecution spoke at the trial, it was Yen's time. He still said he was completely innocent, and he told his version. It was one of the strangest speeches made by a man accused of kidnapping. The man said that someone had set him up. Someone else sneaked into his bar, used his clothes, lured Helen there, and kidnapped her. Then he loaded Yen into the car and drove away in an unknown direction. After all this, the criminal drove the car back to the bar and disappeared, framing the innocent owner of the establishment. After such statements, the jury was even more convinced that Yen was directly related to the crime. After all, his story sounded like outright nonsense. Perhaps he already understood that he was highly likely to go to prison, and decided to mock the justice system and the victim's relatives. As a result, on March 14 of the same year, the man was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. He had the right to apply for early release no earlier than 16 years in prison. Unfortunately, this was far from the end for Helen's family. Police and volunteers continued to search for Helen, but to no avail. 3 years after the sentencing, the girl's mother wrote a letter to the criminal in which she desperately begged him to reveal the location of her daughter. After some time, Yen responded, but his letter contained only insults and threats. He promised to take revenge on the woman as soon as he was released from prison. The villain filed numerous appeals, but they were all rejected. Only in 2004, when he had already spent 15 years behind bars, one of the appeals was granted, and the case was sent for review. But this did not work in favor of the criminal. Using modern DNA analysis tools, experts examined the evidence and came to the conclusion that they all unconditionally prove Yen's guilt. As a result, the review of the case actually led to an increase in the prison term. After 16 years, the criminal repeatedly submitted requests for release, but all of them were rejected. Meanwhile, her family continued to fight to find out the whereabouts of Helen's body. In 2015, her mother launched a social and political campaign, trying to achieve changes in current laws. She demanded that convicts be denied parole until they disclosed the location of the body. The woman gave interviews to various channels, wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, and also created a petition that collected hundreds of thousands of signatures. As a result, this issue was submitted to Parliament for consideration, and at first, politicians positively assessed the possibility of adopting such a law. However, time passed, and Helen's mother's initiative was constantly postponed. All these delays led to the fact that in November 2019, after 30 years in prison, Yen Simpson finally achieved early release. This event was a strong blow for the girl's family. 3 months after the decision was made, the offender was released. 63-year-old Yen Simpson has returned to normal life. True, he did not have to enjoy freedom for long. At the end of June 2022, the man died due to illness, taking the secret with him.